Oops. Hello, hello, hello. Mm,
Wonderful to see folks as usual.
mm,
Take the time to go to the next page if you are moved to. I had to take an unexpected little trip, red eye last night, and be away for a few days. So zooming in from the mainland, as some people call it.
Good to see everybody. Mm, mm. So notice your attention right now and see if you can collect or gather it to just connect with your body. The many different sensations happening within your body or on the surface of the skin, the space around your body. And to begin, we're just going to get in touch with the receiving the goodness of caring about our body, our mind, our heart. And following that thread of care to noticing the difference between trying to care about the pain outside of ourselves and getting overwhelmed. And just noticing we get overwhelmed because we connect with pain. We worry, try to fix, control. So initially, it's just bringing the attention to the experience of caring itself within the heart center or within the sense of our thought process of caring. So understanding being human includes various aspects of pain, outside, inside. And whether it's any physical, emotional, or mental pain outside or within us, it's appreciating it's part of being human, but noticing we can pull back from the objects of the care. You might just make a soft mental note, caring or care. It can be a very quiet tenderness in the heart, mind. And during the sit, or maybe this week, just if you start noticing the attention, start to feel overwhelmed with the helplessness in the face of suffering. Just knowing that's a good thing. We've connected with pain, we care, and we just see if we can pull it back, the attention back from the objects and feeling the goodness of the care itself, receiving that experience of caring about pain. And if you notice the thoughts about something painful pull us off, it's fine. You just notice that and you see if you can again come back to just caring about it and care about thinking itself or having a body itself. And that care and tenderness can, again, we can follow the thread to just being vulnerable with moment to moment change. So allowing that shift to receiving sound, texture, vibration, not through the thought process, but directly, including the silent, from caring to hearing. Just as the sound is happening and disappears by itself. We're receiving just like with the sounds, the physical sensations within our hands. Experiencing the vulnerability of not knowing what's going to happen next, whatever, every moment of the sensations in our hands are new. And not through the thought process as best we can or the visual image. We can connect with just caring about the aliveness, ever present change within our hands. Our hands are so close to our bellies with the movement of the breath there. Just shifting over a little bit to start to notice that movement of life. And if we can receive one rising movement or part of one falling movement till it disappears, or just shifts right into the rising. Never the same breath. And out of this care and stillness and tenderness, at times just letting the sound, sight, smells, taste, touch, thoughts, emotions, the aliveness of sixth sense door awareness emerge, reveal itself moment by moment, out of great care for life itself. Re-anchoring when you need to with the sound, hands, or breath. No problem.
Thank you, Michelle. Thought we'd just offer a little talk this evening before Michelle and I take some time off to sit. About a week ago, I got into the car one afternoon and just had to run into the town, get to the store, and the radio was on already, and it was just the news, and it's that becomes sometimes a little bit of a habit, kind of routine. Uh, and it wasn't even like it wasn't even bad news. It was like the someone was just talking about the like uh, these these little blurbs about maybe like 12 movies that were coming up this year. And it was just so powerful to see how it started. I'm like, okay, so there's this movie and it takes place in this place and sort of about these kinds of people and this kind of dynamic. And here's some things that are interesting about it. And then there's this movie that's coming and it's about these people in this place and this is the dynamic. And it was like, it was just like, and then there's this one, and then there's this, there's this one, there's this one, and it was like at the end, it was just like, like uh, I realized I had hit some maximum overload of stories, not just from this moment, but from whatever has accumulated in my own mind and heart, and not sort of just moved through uh, since maybe the last time I fleshed out, uh, in a fuller way. And I was amazed at sort of just how agitated I got in by what were just like all of like very interesting stories, about very interesting things in the world. Um and so as I was driving, I was like, oh, maybe I'll listen to some music, right? It wasn't like maybe I'll just turn off the radio. It was like I'll find good music to listen to and uh searched around for a while and there was nothing, that I wanted to listen to. And it kind of accidentally went to some station where it was like very fuzzy. You couldn't really hear the music very well. It was a lot of static. And I realized like, oh, I just wanted to hear more static. And so I just like I started turning around the dial, like looking for the purest static I could find. Um, and it was actually quite hard. I had never done that before. It was surprisingly difficult to find just like pure you know there's generally like it's picking up some station a little bit above or a little bit below the dial, and there was something about any amount of just recognition of a song or of a human voice or of anything that evoked anything. It was just like my mind felt like it was at that place where it was like just too tender, to be kind of, and everything felt like a prod, some image, like some conceptualization, and how weary I felt from mm, doing so much of that, you know, and whether it's the past weeks or months or years or lifetimes, And so there was like, what would it be like to just drive around and listen to static, and like I ended up turning it up pretty loud. So it was like I felt like I was in some like college person's experimental film or something, where you're just like watching, there's the cows and it's like, and there's the houses and there's the buildings and there's the sky and everything just has the same. And it was amazing that way in which it was like, there was something very kind of like obliterating about it, kind of neutralizing. You know, we think about feeling tone, in response to images or Vedana, what sounds, our lives, and when you dominate one sense store with something that is like kind of so assertively neutral, or was for me in that moment, the way that does have this, or it did at that point have an impact that was, I don't want to, it wasn't soothing, it was numbing, right? There was something that just like kind of overwhelmed, the neutrality that kind of overwhelmed anything that would otherwise maybe evocative, even in like cows chewing cud. So there was this sense of the way everything became kind of very kind of like one dimensional, in terms of affect and feeling tone. It was, very strange and not, and then I very, I didn't do it for so long. I started to feel like it felt like a crazy, there was something kind of crazy about it. Uh, and I wasn't sure I wanted to like keep doing this to the world, just like enforcing this, um, neutrality on everything, never mind, to my own mind. But I could see that it was a sign of, something very real, in terms of, my own mind, and something that I feel like is alive right now, for so many of us in terms of the kind of inundation in our lives, just with so much intensity, so much voltage, so much content, and, the beauty of trying to stay with that, and stay with the aliveness of it and stay connected to the joys and the sorrows and the neutral terrains and all of it, and the valiant effort, that we all make to not run from it, not hide from it, and try to learn and grow, stretch our hearts into, finding compassion in places that might not always be easy, finding love in places that might not be easy, equanimity, you know, joy. And then where do we, of course, also nourish ourselves in ways that are more inviting for these things to arise naturally, appreciation and beauty and peace and all these tools we have, whether they're formal practice tools or, informal, you know, tools or behavioral patterns or cultural patterns, that we get into to try to manage, the voltage of what we're being required to manage, in a day-to-day life. And well, however much of that is in our own, material existence and, our jobs and our rent and our families and our work and our homes, how much of it is a attunement to the complexities and, hardships in the world, beyond our direct experience, and the often very strong opinions, we form about them, or at least strong emotional responses, to so much, of what's happening now, about how it relates to the past, how it concerns us for the future. And I can see, the ways that I have been trying, that I think part of the understanding, in our tradition, but also in many traditions is, when we are in times where of turmoil and where things feel so bleak and there's a lot of hopelessness and worry and concern, and we see all of the places where humans, can act out of their most contracted and most fearful and most violent and greedy and jealous, and all of these places. And we see we have to develop a relationship with those places in ourselves in order to understand them more deeply and not be so sucked into them and buy into them. But of course we also run the risk in our relationship with them of being more identified with them, and of feeding volatility in our own hearts and our own lives and the world around us. And so I can see the ways that I have been trying to do the piece of the work that's about kind of countering. It's like all of the bad news and all of the stress and anxiety and mm, that sense of these storms forming, in the world, by bringing in beauty, and reminding myself, and not just, but in a practice way, of the beauty of humanity, the beauty of the human heart, and what, and of course of nature, and the happenstance beauty of existence, and the intentional kindness and creativity and wonder, that humans are capable of, and doesn't maybe get as much attention, of course, in the news cycle, and but how fundamental those things are, music and language and poetry, all of the I've realized I've been like almost like uh gorging, you know, on some of these things as a way to kind of counteract what feels is this sort of very oppressive force, coming in from kind of other angles. And I always know that there's a way that it can kind of get out of hand, but it also feels enriching and it feels vital, It's like playing my own instrument, and trying to learn it better and practicing more, and listening to more music, and different music, learning about, you know, there's this cool story I heard about this Tongan guy who moved to Hawaii as a young person and then to the mainland, who was like football was his thing, for his whole life, and got to college on a football scholarship and got pro, went pro for a couple of years, and then had an injury that left that was gonna, like, not going to be part of his life, and his whole life was sort of focused on football, and then he's long story short, somehow got fascinated with opera. Someone kind of took him under his wing and started teaching him about classical music and opera, and he just became famous. He's now famous. He became fascinated, with opera, and just moved to New York and just started waiting tables near Lincoln Center just so he could see these opera singers and study them. And you know, anyway, and so he's like this amazing person who, has gone back to Tonga and is trying to support classical music there. And it's amazing music I've been listening to of this collaboration between these like Swedish artists and these Somali artists. And just like, and sometimes all these things can be very complex. Sometimes they're just simple and beautiful, melodies put together and rhythms, and how wonderful it is to hear, a human voice trying to express something of kindness, of hardship, of, joy, whatever it might be. It's so wonderful. Of, doing my spoon carving and teaching spoon carving. I, taught another spoon carving class a couple of weeks ago at our as a little fundraiser for our canoe club, and just like watching people who maybe didn't have any real training, with learning how to make something with their own hands, like young people, old people, all different kinds of people. Come with like, I give them a little block of wood and some simple tools, a couple knives, and we spend a day just learning how to try to make a spoon, and the frustration, the hardship, and a few wounds, here and there, a little bit of blood offerings. But to see people like, at the end of that day, like have their spoon, that they made, and that they have that memory of having done it with us all together, and they know where the tree came from. I told them it came from the Vipassana Hawaii, what used to be the land, that we had out there that we're still trying to take care of. There's a invasive Java plum trees out there, so cut one down, and this way that like people getting together to work and share time and share food and do something simple, how beautiful that can be, how nourishing, for everyone, and that sense of healthy pride, of learning how to do something new and something material, how awesome that is. I started taking some language classes, the Quechua language, online. It's when I was visiting my family in South America this fall. It was very powerful to see in Bolivia. There were still, at least especially in Sucre, a lot of people still spoke Quechua, the one of the main kind of indigenous languages that really kind of existed before the Incan Empire, but the Inca really kind of turned it into their kind of like dominant language when they kind of moved from place to place. So you have a lot of people, and not only people who are very like, kind of indigenous identified, mixed people, that I encountered in Sucre who still knew a lot of Quechua. And then a lot of indigenous people, I would hear in Sucre, I feel like I heard maybe half Quechua to Spanish. Met a lot of people who still knew a lot of the old ways, and customs and traditions, even if they weren't maybe raised in the rural areas or raised in a really kind of like coherent indigenous tradition. It was still a part of a lot of people's lives. But when I went to back to Ecuador to visit my family, it's very different. It's like there's much more kind of bifurcation in terms of like the kind of native and mestizo community and how people identify, and that the language is very threatened there. Quechua is like a variation of Quechua. It's kind of a dialect. Um, they said in the main one of some of the main areas, still only like 3 out of 10 households still speak in the indigenous areas and communities. Only 3 out of 10 of the households are still speaking it really in the house. And that's like that danger zone, right? When something starts to get lost. It doesn't have to be a ton of people speaking something, but when it's not getting passed down. Um, so anyhow, just taking very basic language class, uh, just how beautiful it is to like, it's very similar to the whatever Hawaiian I've tried to learn in the past, and or when we're in Burma, like trying to learn Burmese, or my pathetic attempts at studying Pali. There's like it's such a relief to get a different perspective, right? Because language is a way that, is a response to the world, but it also coordinates our minds, our relationship to things in ways that are different. So powerful to even get like a little bit of window into that. There was this beautiful word, nyaupa. And it sort of means, it sort of relates to the past. Things related to the past are nyaupa something. I just looked at nyaupa. All uh, nyaupak. That's like the past. Uh, nyaupari is our predecessor. Uh, the word for our ancestors is all in the past, but it also means in front of you uh, and ahead of you. And so, in that sort of like Andean cosmovision, this is like very, I'm, I'm not trying to say that this is something I have a firm grasp on, but to give you a little sense of what is like so powerful and so beautiful of like when a moment of like opening your mind opening in a different way. The pacha, which is sometimes refers to land. You might have heard the term, Pachamama, Mother Earth, but it means space time, and that there's a way in which space and time are not separated in the sort of cosmovision. And so, in this way, that Nyapa means on one hand the past, it also refers to what's in front of you in that sort of time space way. And one way that it was described is that it's like if you plant a seed now, that moment quickly goes into the past, but that somehow it's in the past that it starts to move towards the future as a plant, that it grows into a plant as it moves further back in time, right? That action, that entity. And so that there's a way in which, as the present moment quickly becomes the past, that's how we re-encounter it. It re-arises in front of us, before us. And so that time is always moving backwards, but showing up in front of us um, in a loop that's like so cool. A way of like, kind of trying to wrap your head around thinking about that, of just like the way in which time is so oriented. And even though, and then it's like this question of like, well, we talk about it in the Dhamma, impermanence and karma, about an action that has an impact in the future. What do we think about? What is the reference point in terms of the direction of time? And how is, the Buddha speaks very clearly about like you can't know the functioning of karma in detail. The mechanics of it will, explode your mind. And this had a little of that flavor, right? Of like, oh, this is like, could that be how it actually is working, right? That it's actually like from the past that things are having their impact on the future. And so it's like, to me, there has been something, just like any moment like that is so beautiful. It's so powerful. It's such a relief to get out of any kind of box or sort of fixed way of thinking, of a tendency, and to sort of be more open to what the truth might be, or truth might be. And how does that impact my own relationship to the present moment and understanding, the present and the past? We think and we see in this tradition so much of our emphasis on the future or the past, so much of our mental energy spent there, right? Thinking about what's to come in the long-term future or just the next moment, who we're going to be, ruminating on the past actions, past events, things that have happened to us. in some ways it helps us, it feels like it gives us a little bit of sense of space from the claustrophobia of the present moment. The overwhelm, the inundation we have with how fast sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, all these phenomena are sort of arising out of our control. And we stretch into thinking about the future and the past. We sort of expand the sense of our placement in time and space. And and there's a way you can see that gives us a little bit of breathing room, but it also is the source of so much of our suffering, anxiety about the future, worry and remorse about the past, wanting and not wanting. And, so much of the dukkha also comes from that. And so this sense of how do we learn that the deepest relief, right? The deepest, what we call space is actually not physical space, but equanimity, right? That's how we get a feeling of space with what's happening. We don't need to actually get physically distant from it. We don't need to get emotionally or psychically distant from it. The more the mind is able to be with what's happening, what's arising right now in the mind and the body and the senses, and familiarize with that, accustomed to the impermanent nature of things, that we have more peace, equanimity, right? It doesn't require us to be forcing a artificial sense of space, right? Because in this framework, of course, the past and the future are not real. They don't actually exist. It's not that they didn't happen or not that things won't happen, but they don't actually exist right now. The only thing that exists is what we're experiencing directly. And that intensity of that is so overwhelming that we try to stretch it out, we'll give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. But what is it to just, be in it? And so there is something for me of like, and I have been in more Hawaiian, so it's like, okay, really trying to get into like what are these words, that because there are other words that are used commonly now in kind of English and non-traditional settings when people are speaking English, and it's like, is that really what is meant by pono? Is that really what's meant by aloha? People talk about their amakua, and it's like, is that really what that means? Or what are the different ways that that's been held, in the past? And so I've got like all this. It's like I look at like the tables of like the books and the papers and the music and I'm like, oh, I have a lot. I'm trying to like uh fight back against some encroaching thing. And then of course everywhere you look, it's still there. The sadness, the grief, the tragedies, the reading about the great Mahele or my teacher, the language we call Quechua. In Quechua, I think it's Ramashino, I think is how you say it. It's like the language of people. But for many years, after colonialization, it was called uh, Rama something or other, Rana something or other. That was like means the useless language, right? That's what the Spaniards called it, the useless language. But that people started calling it that. So my teacher, he says his mother called it that, and that they would talk in Quechua. But what she would say is like, okay, let's speak the useless language. And he, as he got educated and he started to take pride in his culture, his language. And it's like he was like, Mom, why do you call it that? Like, let's don't call it that. Let's call it what it's called. And he said she never could change. She always called it that. So it's like, in any of these beautiful things, you also come to all of humanity. You come to the the fullness of sorrows and joys, you know, and all of the beauty and the horrors, of history and their impacts on us. And so there is a value in this, like trying to balance all the badness with goodness, trying to just like not let that force of badness overwhelm our hearts, our bodies, our minds, and our communities, our families. Of course, there is this side of like, people feel very powerless, these days. Many people. Some people don't feel very powerless, I think, but a lot of people do. And it's like, we're focusing on how do we manage that reality? How do we, come to terms with the things that are out of our control? But it's also not to forget that like, you know, you you can try to build power, like power in the world. That's not like unheard of, I mean, it just means you're going to get into the mix, you know, and that's complicated. You know, I remember this gathering I went to some years ago of, spiritual activists, people who were trying to do social justice work with from different spiritual traditions. And someone there asked, and he was like, do you know all these groovy people talking about all the good things they want to do? And it's like, do we want power enough to win? And it was like, wow, the room went pretty quiet because that's a very complicated question, really, for anyone who's like earnest about their spiritual path. The desire for power is like should be very like a very serious, sober question, you know. And yet, if you're actually talking about changing things, that's what it requires. And so it's like it's also not mysterious on that level. It's like if you want social power, that takes like a certain kind of organizing and and there are people who know how to do that. And we can, people can take responsibility for that. The tools that we're offering, in this context are not those tools. They can inform them, right? So that like if if you do, when you choose to get involved and you choose to, it's like, okay, well, I believe that power should be held more by this faction of society than by this faction of society. It's like, okay, you're in it. You're getting into the samsara, and it could be a beautiful commitment. But it's like, I read a thing, I think it was like a Valentine's Day thing from Che Guevara who said, it's a something to the effect of it's a terrible thing to have no friends, but it's much worse to have no enemies, you know? And it's like, whew, all right. But that's that take on it, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to be pushing uh, a a view and a belief and a way forward, it's like it requires the confrontation with forces in the world, in our world, that are opposed to that. And so, what does it mean to put yourself in those roles, those relationships, those positions? It's has its own layers of exhaustion and and beauty and of potential and of hope. But I also know that doesn't the there is something about this path that doesn't have to negate that, but also to recognize that it's different. That the promise of this is not just in the approach that I was sort of describing of like there's bad news, okay, we're going to do good things and we're going to double down on culture and music and poetry and all of the beauty, like that is important, but it still has that duality, right? That polarity, that dialectic of, well, it's like, who's going to win? And there's some part of that that's never going to end. It's like we have to understand that. And that doesn't mean that that's not worth doing. It changes the relationship of what we think we're expecting from it and what we think we're getting out of it. And there's a purification that can come from that, of still committing to the beauty without the expectation that it's going to necessarily lead to the promised land for eternity. And so, given that, where is also our responsibility as yogis, as practitioners, to know that we also want something quieter, that there's something of that static that is just building with actually more beautiful noise versus awful noise, but it also ends up feeling like sometimes it's just noise. Like all of the good stories and all the bad stories and all the, it's like the the pitch, the fevered pitch that it can get to is still dukkha, you know, and still suffering in its way. And how hard it is for us to let go of that and to also remind ourselves that there's something quieter, something more peaceful than that dialectic, more peaceful than the fighting against everything internally or externally, and that is deeply nourishing, deeply healing, you know. That at some points we realize how thirsty we are for that. There's a woman who's been our kind of like, insurance broker for Vipassana Hawaii for many years. And it's time for our sort of yearly renovation. And she was saying how she lives in Honolulu, right? And her parents had died recently, and so she had to come to the Big Island to kind of deal with their home and their stuff, and where they lived is like pretty quiet. And I said, "Oh yeah, what do you think?" Because you go to Honolulu and everyone's like, "Oh, we wish we lived Big Island." It's like, no, they don't. Like, not really. Most of the time, they like being hopped up in the city when they're in the city. And this woman was like, she's like, "Yeah, it was cool, but it's like it's pretty quiet." She's like, "You end up just sort of there's a lot of time for just reflecting." And she was like, it was too much. She was like, it was better for me to just come back to the city, you know? It was just like, uh, and she's right. It's like I can totally see it's like where it's like quiet where they are. She's like, okay, just sitting on the porch, like contemplating all day. She's like, ah, it's not for me. I need to like get back to work. And yeah, and whatever. We all have that. We're all afraid of the quiet. I mean, it's not, it's like, and and we all find the static at whatever level. It's like you get to the farmer's market and the way, man, it's like, oh, you come out and it's like, you start to feel like the voltage of whatever. One human interaction, in your morning walk, Michelle talks about a lot of time, right? Where it's like, you get kind of buzzed the whole day. So you get sensitive to whatever level of voltage and there's something so wonderful about being in the the dynamism of an urban and more urban environment. And it has again that same spectrum of all of the beauty and hardship of our humanity. Mm. And yet, right, this sense of quietude, of settling down, of letting things come to an end in the mind, in the body. A sound arises and passes on its own. We don't need to kind of be blowing on it to nourish it, to nurture it, to fan it into flames. That the purity of the practice on that level of just like things are as they are. A sound comes and goes, a thought comes and goes, an emotion comes and goes, body sensation comes and goes. The purity of that, the mind not needing to get involved in all of that. Not needing to be so invested in the cycles of samsara, whether that's our own rebirth in terms of lifetimes or just the loops that we know are in, however space and time work and however karma works and however these things work, it's like putting it down knowing that there's a deeper strength, a deeper peace, a deeper kindness that's available to us through that relinquishment. And it comes through the strength of not needing things to be one way or another in the breath and the body and sound. That it's okay if it's an unpleasant sound. It's okay if it's something really beautiful, but you see it fading away. You know, we train the mind in our direct experience, and yet it has impact on things that are more formed. Someone's life that we love when they're passing away. You know, someone really difficult that enters our lives or enters the sound stream, you know, or things we know about in the world. It doesn't mean that we're not caring. It doesn't mean we're disconnected. It doesn't mean we're just turning on the static radio of just sort of numbing out to it. Though you can see there are times where that might be like a tool, right, that helps us make it through this deeper sense of actually it's like through the full commitment, the full connection, the full ability to be present that we come to terms, you know, with our own agitation. And we see how much of our wanting to fix things, wanting to change things, wanting to manipulate comes through our own emotional inability to be with things as they are, to, to bear the truth of their impermanence, right? To bear the truth of something very unpleasant. And that we can, if we can bear the heat of that, the mental heat, the physical heat, that we don't squirm, you know, and we have access to wisdom. We have access to patience. We have access to clarity, kindness, you know, versus if something is happening and we're so upset about it, we lose access to these deeper, more beautiful qualities, you know, and we just come out in anger or aggression, tension, you know, whatever it might be. You know, the Buddha spoke about, you know, friendship as, you know, the most, you know, more than half of the holy life is spiritual friendship. You know, it's inconceivable how important spiritual friendship is to this path. It's so beautiful in some ways because it can feel so isolating, or there's an emphasis so much on our own practice and, you know, our own work that we have to do, the personal sort of individual side of it. But even in that, you know, even in the sense that it's all of the holy life, you know, it's a spiritual friendship. It's a very particular flavor of friendship, right? It's one that supports this phrase that gets used a lot of seclusion, dispassion, cessation, release. Seclusion, dispassion, cessation, release. It's a very particular and peculiar form of friendship that supports seclusion, right? That supports dispassion, the ending of effluence, the ending of whatever it might be, the letting go, the not needing to have the self of us clinging on to our this that tightness of identification be the baseline of our lives, what provides meaning, what provides stability and security, releasing even that, right? Sense of me-ness, mindness. You know how hard that is. How hard that is to let go of. Unbelievably hard. The hardest thing. And so it requires these very strange and beautiful tools, methods, and structures of support. You know, our meditation practice, these periods of silence, of closing our eyes, of letting go of the world around us, letting go of the world internally, right? Through relationship, through exploration and knowing and connecting, watching ourselves cling, watching ourselves reject, and coming, purifying our mind over and over and over again through these workings. How beautiful that we have these tools, and these practices, and of course these frameworks for longer periods. We're really looking forward to getting back, to teaching longer retreats this year with folks, in person, online, just being able to like get back into, a Zoom room together or a physical room together, and that piece of just like being in a room that's full of people and it's just totally quiet, and you can see how many days of a retreat it takes for that room to really settle down usually, and how holy that is, how sacred, how rare, how important, how good it is. And it allows for the whatever's happening in our lives, whatever's happening in the world around us, whatever, beautiful and horrible things, it's like it's acknowledging them, it's giving them the room to be born, live out, and die. And make sure that however we're relating to those things is coming out of our deepest understanding of wisdom, our deepest intentions, for ourselves and for the world, not only out of our anxiety or our worries, our wants. And so there is something that's still beautiful and that also leads towards release, It is also this practice of metta, of loving kindness, of care, tenderheartedness toward whatever's arising in ourselves and with whomever we're in contact, whatever other humans, whatever people, whatever animals, whatever material objects, that we find ourselves in, whatever rooms we're in, whatever trees and stones, and vistas, to remember the beauty of kindness as something that is this like bridge, you know, between all of the static, and all of the cycles of samsara, the ups and downs, the swinging back and forth, right? That it's never not appropriate to care. Like whether things are on the upswing or things are on the downswing, whether it's terrible or whether it's beautiful, it's like love is always appropriate response. And it's also simple. I think that the other side is like sometimes all of the world and families and our minds and our ideas, everything gets so complicated, and so full of ideas and words and language and again, there's something sometimes so beautiful about that. And on the other hand, there's also times where it's like it's just a lot of complexity, and it's not that complicated to just care, care for someone, maybe they don't see you, they're just pumping gas, or maybe they're all up in your face about, something they thought you did, or maybe they're crying, alone, or, so many people homeless these days, with so much suffering, so much mental anguish and mind states that they can't get a hold of. They can't kind of that have taken them over, consumed, just like, oh, caring, you know. And then how many people not on the edges of society, not on the edges of whatever, right in the middle who are consumed. Can we care about them too? So I was gonna read just the uh, little of the Metta Sutta again. I don't know, Michelle, would you wanna chant it? Or do you wanna, oh, you're muted right now. I could do it in English and you could chant it in Pali, or we
Yeah, I
could do.
don't. I had the copy in my room, but it seems to be blow. The wind was so strong. The wind blew everything. It's
I could
like
share
every.
the screen. Could
Okay,
that work for you?
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't chanted it for a while, but yes.
Yeah.
So you're gonna do what?
I'll read it. I'll read the English. We could do
Okay.
the Hawaiian. We'll do the Hawaiian another day because that feels important. But since
Yeah.
I'm not home, it feels I'll do it
Yes.
when I'm back.
Does
So
everyone want to
I'll
chant?
share the screen. So it'll just be you and I because you know how the chanting gets kind of crazy when it's everyone.
Sure.
So I'll read a phrase in English and then you chant it in Pali, and then we'll go back and forth.
Sure, or vice versa. But I will do Polly. Yes.
Here we go. Can you see it?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll do the English. Here is what is worth doing by one skilled in what is truly meaningful. Having glimpsed the place of peace, they should be capable, honest, oops, I can't read it, and very upright, easy to speak to, gentle, and not thinking themselves above others.
And you can join in to chant even though we're not. You won't hear yourself on the screen. But if you want to join in, that's fine. Karaniyam Matakusalena Yantam Santam Padam Abhisamecha Sako Ujucha Subucha Suako Chasa Mudu Anatimani.
Contented and easy to support, not too busy, and living lightly, tranquil and seeing and sensing and wise, not too forward nor greedy for patrons.
Santu Sakocha Subarocha Apakichocha Saulahu Kauti Santindriocha Nipakocha Apagabo Kule Wananukido.
And one should not do the slightest thing with which other wise ones may find fault, wishing may all have ease and safety. May all beings be in a state of ease.
Nacha Kudam Acharya Kinchi Ina Winyu Pare Ubawadeyam Sukino wa Kemino Hantu Sabasata Bhavantu Sukhitata.
whatever living creatures there are without exception, trembling or steady, long, huge or middle-sized, short, tiny or massive.
Ekechi panabutati tasawa tawara wanawasesa. Digawaye wa mahanta majima rasaka anukutula.
Whether seen or unseen, and whether living far or near, whether in existence or coming into being, may all beings be in a state of ease.
Titawaye wa adita ewa dere wa santi awitere Bhutawa sambhave siva sabasata bhavantu sukhitata.
Let no one deceive another or think themselves above anyone anywhere. Let no one wish suffering for any other out of resentment or hateful thoughts.
Na paro param nikubeta nati menata kata chinakanchi Piarosana patiga sanya nanyamanya saduka michaya.
Just as a mother would protect her own child, her only child, with her life, one should cultivate such a state of mind toward all beings without limit.
Matayata niyam puta mayusa eka putam anurake evampi sabaputesu manasam bhavaye aparimanam.
And toward all the universe, one should cultivate a state of mind of goodwill without limit, above, below, and all around, unobstructed, purified from enmity and hatred.
Metancha sabalokasmi manasam bhavaye aparimanam udam adocha tiriyancha asambadam avaramasa patam.
Whether standing, moving, sitting, or lying, for as long as one is yet to fall asleep, one should be steadfast in this attentiveness. This is said to be divine abiding here and now.
Titam charam nisinoa sayano ya watasa vitamido etam satim aditya brahmametam viharamidam ahu.
Not fixed on a view with virtuous conduct, perfected through clarity of vision, training away the greed for pleasures, one goes no more towards being conceived and born.
Ditincha anupagama silavadasena sampano kamesu vinaya gedam nahi jatu gabasaya punare titi.
Mm. Thank you, Michelle. So just a reminder that that version, that you can download that on the website, around the page on the website that says something like metta chant in Hawaiian, and you can hear a recording of of course, of the voicing of the Hawaiian version of it as well, and hear a little of that story if you don't know it. We'll tell it again someday soon. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening, coming again to the Sunday sitting, and for the particular kind of spiritual friendship that's allows Michelle and I to go sit for a little while too, and have our time for a little seclusion, dispassion, hopefully some cessation, some release. We'll see. But yeah, and just, thank you for the folks who are going to help and kind of, hold the sitting space and the Zoom stuff, but just for showing up and keeping that consistency going as a community, because it is important, and it is something that actually I think is really healthy, that we're not always the sort of central focus of all this time. Um, and so we hope you have a good time, sitting together over the next weeks and save
Support,
yourselves.
supporting each other in your practice. Sangha.
Yeah.
It's taking refuge in the Sangha.
Mm. Okay, everyone, take good care. We'll see you soon. Mm.
Mm.
Aloha.